We're all going to be busy this week. Joining us now, the Democratic Congressman from Maryland, Jamie Raskin. He's a member of both the Judiciary and the Oversight Committees. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us.
Delighted to be with you.
Does it sound to you like the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, is suggesting that Mueller's Russia report will be suppressed in some significant way?
Well, it's hard to read the tea leaves on that. You know, I do keep hearing them repeat that, you know, the Department of Justice position that the president can't be indicted directly by the Department of Justice while he's still in office. Of course, that doesn't mean necessarily that the material about the president should be taken out of the report. If there were crimes committed, if there's evidence of crimes being committed, that should be turned over to us, because it's a mere technicality, if you will, that the president's not being indicted at that point, and we think that we're owed that information, and the people's representatives have a right to it.
Will Democrats subpoena that report if necessary?
Well, you know, there's a slogan in the information age that information wants to be free, and I think that this is information that really wants to be free, and that goes right to the heart of democratic self-government. So I think that we're determined to get basically any evidence of wrongdoing that was compiled by the special counsel.
The House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff says he's prepared to subpoena Robert Mueller himself in order to get the information. Do you agree?
Certainly, there are a lot of people interested in doing that, and you know, I would hope that the report would be turned over essentially in its entirety, unless there's some compelling reason that it cannot be turned over, or part of it has to be censored out. But if it requires subpoenaing various individuals who have knowledge of it, then I think we're willing to go there. I mean, this is a democracy, and what we're talking about is crimes against the republic, and we have a constitutional oversight responsibility to try to get to the bottom of what's been taking place in our country.
Rod Rosenstein, the outgoing Deputy Attorney General, says he's convinced the new Attorney General, Bill Barr, will do, in his words, the right thing. Do you trust Bill Barr?
Well, obviously, he's new to the office. He wrote a memo that essentially endorsed the most extreme version of the unitary executive philosophy, which is that everybody in the executive branch essentially can be fired by the president at any time for any reason, including what the rest of us would consider obstruction of justice. So I think that a lot of us have a wary stance towards the new Attorney General. But the real point this week is that we're going to try to get to the bottom of what's been taking place. I mean, we know about several campaign finance violations that took place by Michael Cohen and by the president working with him. We're interested in trying to get to the bottom of all of the campaign finance violations that were taking place, all of the hush money payoffs that went to all of the women, and the various tax violations and the failures to disclose on public forums and so on. There's a lot of lawlessness which is permeating out of the White House.
When he comes before your committee on Wednesday, the House Oversight Committee, open session, what are you planning on asking the president's former fixer and attorney, Michael Cohen?
Well, the Intelligence Committee is going to focus on the Russia connection and what took place in terms of the oligarchs and Putin and so on. And we're going to focus on the campaign finance violations, the hush money payoffs, the obstruction of justice, the various other abuses of power that have taken place. But, you know, this guy was with the president for more than a decade, and he has kind of a bird's eye view of what's taken place. I believe that the president has basically tried to turn the government of the United States into a money-making operation for himself, his business, his family, and his friends. And I think Michael Cohen understands how the whole operation was working, and we want him to tell us what exactly has been taking place.
So am I hearing you correctly that you're not going to ask him about Russia, for example, the Trump Tower project that was proposed to be built in Moscow, and Cohen was involved in that? Are we not going to hear anything like that when your committee questions him on Wednesday?
Well, I think that the jurisdictions of the various committees are kind of overlapping, so undoubtedly there will be things asked about the Moscow project and the Trump Tower project in Moscow. But we are trying to allow the Intelligence Committee to do a lot of the research and investigation into the Russia connection, and we're looking at the domestic side of the lawlessness, but obviously they blur together there.
Because a lot of the American public is really interested, obviously, in what Michael Cohen has to say. He'll be behind closed doors on Tuesday and Thursday. It's your committee that will have him in open session. Are there particular things you think he needs to discuss for the American public to hear?
Well, one of the things that he pled guilty to lying about for the president was whether or not there were continuing business negotiations taking place through the year. Originally, he had testified that it ended in January of 2016. We want to know what kinds of negotiations took place, who was involved in them, what banks and financial institutions were involved on the Russian side, what banks and financial institutions were involved in on this side, where was the financing going to come from, and who were all of the individuals who were involved in trying to negotiate that deal. So in terms of that question, there is a lot that we want to know that goes to the domestic side of the equation. We know what came out of that was efforts by Russia through perhaps the greatest active measure intelligence operation of all time to get the White House to change its position on various sanctions that had been leveled against Russia. And so we're interested in what he knows about that. What was the quo and the quid pro quo?
We know the hearing is scheduled to begin at 10 a.m. Wednesday morning. How much time have you budgeted for this hearing?
Well, I think that the members of the committee have pretty much cleared out their day. We don't get a lot of time as individual members, as you know, to question. We each get 5 minutes, so we're trying to divide up the labor as much as possible so we can cover as much ground as possible. But there are a whole bunch of issues that we're looking into because the respect for the rule of law within the White House is obviously at a very low state. So there's a lot for us to sink our teeth into.
We'll, of course, have live coverage of all of that. Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland, thanks so much for joining us.